Welcome to Shaping the New York City Skyline, the podcast that explores the stories behind the buildings that shape our city. I'm your host, Brenda Slokowski, and I'm here with my co-host,
David Shamshovich. Hi, Brenda, Camilla. How you doing?
Hey, David. Hey, Camilla.
Hi, guys. How's everybody doing?
What a day.
Yeah.
What a day.
What a day. What a guest.
We not only do legal work at Side and Shine.
It's my favorite part of my job, I'll tell you.
Well, it's the thing that keeps us employed because it's what brings home the bacon. We're here to talk about shaping the NYC skyline. And we talked to an amazing person from the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development.
HPD to those in the know.
We talked to the Deputy Commissioner for Development, Kim Darga. And
what a get. I'll tell you, we're really expanding to the point where they're coming to us.
I mean, they were all coming to us beforehand, but we asked them to come. So I don't know. I guess, yes, they're coming to us, but we've requested them to come to us.
Well, physically, they're coming to us, but emotionally,
yeah.
Now.
You're really splitting hairs here.
Yeah.
Kim came to talk about lots of cool things that are happening at HPD, creative problem solving that they're undergoing to try to solve for this affordable and housing crisis that we're experiencing, which seems to be even worse than before, given the multiple layers of issues that she mentions when we spoke with her.
Her creative solutions give me hope. You know, I like that HPD is really working to try and find solutions to work with developers.
Yeah, it's the creativity and the thinking, and also the request for opinions from developers or from landlords, from building owners, people out there in the development community, those listening to this podcast or part of the development community. They should feel free to reach out to HPD. HPD really wants to try as best they can to help. And the agency gets a lot of grief for the staff shortages and for not going as quickly as some developers want them to. But the reality is that they're working pretty well given the circumstances, given the sheer number of projects. I mean, the entire city is really their oyster, and they have, only a handful of project managers, maybe even less for each group, and a number of programs that are available from preservation to new construction and lots of things in between. They're not just enforcement. They don't just come into your building to give you violations, although that's an important aspect.
They have a million other departments that they are making do with the low staff.
Particularly for subsidies, it takes a long time to get those because there's a lot of need and very little available, which is why the 421A tax exemption not being in existence is such a hard hit, because that gives them a program. Yes, they have to process those, but it's private money. It's not like it's going to run out. It's the developer's responsibility to obtain that private financing, and the city needs those partners. In the meantime, they're coming up with whatever creative solutions they can to try to soften that blow. But they have limitations also. I'm
particularly excited about the new Mimi program. I'm looking forward to see how it works and seeing what projects it can really help. Well,
right now it's in the request, as Kim mentioned, it's in the request for proposal stage, which is it's still in the works. They're looking to hear back from those in need whether it will work. It has a very deep affordability requirement. Normally you would have a 70-30 building, 70 skewed towards market rate. Here you have the opposite, 70 affordable, 30 market rate. At least that's what's suggested or asked. It's a very high ask because the pressure is on deeper affordability, and they're trying to get it in neighborhoods where there's not a lot of affordable housing, which I would gather means probably similar neighborhoods to where a 421A project would be. So they're trying to kind of soften some of that loss of development. And I don't know whether financially it works, whether those units can subsidize the affordable housing, and whether those units can be filled with market rate tenants to the degree that it's necessary for subsidy. It's also going to include, Article 11 exemption and private financing, or maybe some subsidy. So it's hard to say. I don't think it's something that HPD knows just yet, but it sounds like they have other things that they're thinking about too. This is not the end. And hopefully at some point the legislature then passes a 420 replacement that's a little more, has deeper affordability, that provides the exemption we need to get development back up and running in New York City.
Yeah, I think our listeners are really going to enjoy hearing Kim talk about all of these aspects.
Yeah, and I know, Camilla, you really liked to hear from Kim. It was really interesting to hear.
It was great. She had so many ideas, and to hear from someone that has been at HPD for so long, when on the day-to-day we see people leaving HPD and she stayed, shows a lot about who she is and what her message is. And we just learned a lot from her.
Yeah, she's been at HPD for 16 years, started as a project manager, and now
Spoilers.
now is a deputy commissioner for development. Now she's running a department only one of which she was part of before. Now she's running, these number of divisions, including a lot of the divisions that we work with, which is builds, HPD marketing, inclusionary housing, and 421A, among others. So it's a very interesting role. I'm sure she's extremely busy. We were so excited to have her here and so happy that she spoke about and was so open to tell us about the things that she's working on in her career. And I think our Skyliners are going to absolutely love hearing how HPD is
shaping the New York City skyline.
And don't forget, we're hoping that we'll have some more HPD people on the show. Kim Darga hopefully shouldn't be the last. And we're really excited to see others and hear from others from different departments, their perspective, and interesting things that they're doing to ease the housing crisis.
But for now, without further ado,
Kim Darga.
Hi, David. Hi, Camilla.
Hey guys, how are you doing?
Good.
Happy weekday.
Happy 2024, I would say, right?
Wow. Whoa.
Yeah.
Didn't love that.
No.
Happy 2024.
It feels like we should have flying cars by now.
No.
But we don't.
I disagree. I don't want to be flying like that. If I have to pay for an airplane, I'll pay for an airplane. I don't need my car to fly.
I think I just solved the affordable housing crisis. I think we have flying houses. We could just put them in the air and float But speaking of solving the affordable housing crisis, we have someone here who actually is doing that.
A key player.
Key player is in the weeds on that. She's a Michigan native, earned a BA and Master's of Public Policy from the University of Michigan.
I missed my opportunity to say go blue. Sorry.
There'll be many opportunities. Don't worry.
And she wanted to come in with face paint, but unfortunately we're not on video. She began her career as a high school teacher in Michigan, but quickly pivoted to doing economic development and earning urban planning in upstate New York and in Texas, where she moved. And finally, she arrived in New York City, where she became a project manager with the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, an agency that Side and Shine we're at this table all familiar with.
Besties.
And for the last 16 years, she's moved up the ranks to various roles, director roles, to her role today, which is the head of office development at HPD, deputy commissioner. I'm very excited to introduce to you Kim Darga.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I know you were startled. You were startled by the claps.
That was good crowd noise.
Thanks.
Reminded me of last night. So
yeah, what we did was we
Good ones.
emailed all of our Skyliners and told them to send a clap in, and then we combined all of them together.
Perfect.
So there's about 1 million.
1 million. We're rising the ranks.
It's
Soon to be
true
trillions.
We'll get there slowly but surely.
Yeah.
Well, Kim, we're so happy and so excited and been waiting so patiently to speak with you, and so happy to see you here.
I'm excited to be here.
So we're going to jump right into it. I've gave a little bit of intro of your background, so I'm not even sure we need to really delve into it. But when we spoke a little bit previously, you had mentioned that when you came to New York, you knew that housing was what you wanted to do. Obviously, that's not how you started. How is it that you knew that?
It was a bit of a winding road. So first of all, I have to say I'm a Michigan native, and this is an exciting day to be a Michigan native because I went to the University of Michigan and they won the national championship for NCAA football last night. It's been since I was in college that last happened. So, but my road to housing was a very winding one. Like I said, I grew up in Michigan in an auto industry family. And when I went to college, I thought I wanted to be an engineer. And I learned pretty quickly that wasn't really something that I felt passionate about. It was kind of boring to me.
Not for everybody.
I'm really grateful there are other people that find that work rewarding and exciting, but it wasn't a good fit for me. So it took me a little while to figure it out, but I ended up deciding I wanted to be a teacher, and I taught high school for a few years. And I learned something about myself doing that, which is that I am not a extremely patient person. And that's actually useful in my current work, but it wasn't so great as a high school teacher. And so I went back to graduate school, and I thought I was going to actually focus on education policy. And, in graduate school, you take a variety of classes. I pretty quickly gravitated toward classes that focused on development issues. So everything from environmental issues to finance to urban planning issues, and was involved in some capstone projects that just were really interesting to me. And so when I finished graduate school, I decided that I wanted to do development work, and I wanted to do it at the local level. So I ended up working for some consulting firms. I did environmental planning, economic development kind of consulting work, and ended up in Texas, in Dallas. And I had one of my I think most, rewarding jobs I've ever had. I really enjoyed it. I was working for the City of Dallas Department of Economic Development, managing some of their tax increment financing districts. And we got to work, is helping think about neighborhood planning, historic preservation, community development, real estate development, what actually made sense for the community and how to also improve the economic situation in the city by improving the tax base over time. And we got to work on so many different issues there, from, the design guidelines for the district to thinking about community organizations and how they could be part of the process, to what type of real estate development made sense. And that was my first exposure to negotiating real estate transactions. I worked with a few developers that were looking to build within the districts, and there were a lot of requirements to do so, including infrastructure related and design related. The districts also had an inclusionary housing requirement. And the one concern that I heard from multiple developers was ability to actually build the project that they had in mind with the inclusionary housing requirement. And so when my husband and I moved back to New York, so we'd been here briefly before, I decided that I had to know more about housing. So it was really I felt like there was a challenge there, or like there was intellectual curiosity. I didn't know enough, and I couldn't really address the questions or the issues that were being raised. And so I ended up being a project manager at HPD. It was 2007.
Prime time for real estate.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It was 2007. So the market was, that was really the beginning of the recession in New York. And I felt I was really lucky to get a job at HPD at that moment in time. The agency was not doing a lot of hiring already. And I ended up in the low-income housing tax credit preservation program, which we call fondly year 15, although not everybody ends up going through the process in year 15. But it was a brand new program, and it was an exciting place to be because it was new, and we had to figure out basically how to work with owners to help them address their issues and put their projects on the road to success long term.
Could you explain a little bit about the Year 15 program and what types of things you would be working on? And I understand it, but I want to make sure that our audience does.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I think a lot of people, when they think HPD, they think either enforcement agency or they think 421A and inclusionary housing. And those are clearly two very big and important things that the agency works on. I don't know that a lot of folks actually know a lot about the work that HPD does to preserve and stabilize existing affordable housing. And so low-income housing tax credits are clearly one of the biggest federal tools to finance affordable housing across the country. And the earliest projects were developed using tax credits in the late 1980s. And so the compliance period for those first projects was 15 years. So by the early 2000s, the first tax credit projects in the country, including those in New York, were reaching the end of their initial compliance period. And the tax credit investor could exit the partnership. And so there were questions that the city was grappling with in terms of certainly had to review the transfers, right? The limited partner exits and change of ownership, but also questions about how do we preserve the housing affordability? How do we make sure these properties remain good quality long-term, financially viable, physically viable, that they're good places to live? And so that first stretch, that first year or so, 2006, 2007, there was a backlog of projects that had already reached year 15. And the agency was setting up processes and thinking through issues of how we support the projects and how we would ensure affordability long term. So it was exciting. I was the only project manager, which, there was a huge pipeline. It certainly, that creates some stress, but it also created some incredible opportunity and exposure for me.
Has the Year 15 program evolved over time, or is it roughly the same as it was?
Well, it's certainly bigger and I would say more complex than it was back in 2007, 2008. Back then it was the two staff people. I was the only project manager and there was the program director, and we kind of made do, did it all, whatever it took. Now the program has a lot more staff. The projects are also much more diverse, right? So the earliest tax credit projects, it was, with anything that's new, it's a little bit of learn as you go. So there was some variation just as people figured things out. But they tended to be with some of the same syndicators. There were a few development organizations that were involved. And over time, it was largely used to preserve existing housing, right? The city at that point in time still had a pretty sizable in-rem stock that we owned. And so by, the early to mid 2000s, the city wasn't just focused on using that resource to preserve, stabilize, renovate the in-rem portfolio, but also was starting to focus on new construction and also look at privately owned property and how to stabilize it. And so certainly the development teams were much more diverse, and the type of properties that we were trying to preserve was much more diverse. So I think that has raised lots of questions for HPD and the staff that have managed the program, including thinking about, the different motivation of the organizations we work with, right? What they're trying to achieve for them, their organizations long term. Motivation certainly differs. But in addition to that, the type of housing. So what are we trying to achieve long term? Originally, we would just extend the initial regulatory restrictions for another 15 years or the term of any financial assistance. And we've gotten more nuanced in thinking about what we're trying to achieve. So, the demand in New York City for housing is tremendous. It's particularly acute for the lowest income households in New York. And so rather than just extend the restrictions at 60% of area median income, which is the base tax credit requirement, we started to think about providing housing for very low income households. So if you look at the rent roll for a project today, are there opportunities to preserve housing opportunities for lower income households? How do we do that within the regulatory structure? Are there opportunities to provide housing on turnover for folks exiting shelter, for households exiting shelter? So we've gotten more nuanced in how we think about achieving our public goals. And, I think people hear about the big stories, right? There's, we're a lot of people in shelter today. There are, certain housing needs for households with people as they're aging, trying to help with households that have children and making sure they have adequate space, making sure we have good housing quality, or addressing sustainability issues. All of these things ultimately that we're trying to achieve, we have to think through how we structure our transactions to actually achieve those goals. And I think what's happened in the Year 15 program over the last 15 or so years now shows how, we take each transaction and we think about how we can meet those overall city goals through those individual transactions.
And I guess a lot depends also on that pipeline, and the pipeline depends on those developers or landlords that come to you. Is that all that HPD depends on, or has HPD done outreach to try to get people to understand these programs and participate?
Yeah. So we have done a lot of targeted outreach over the years. For preservation, particularly, we've experimented with different types of outreach. So Year 15 is unique, right? Because we know the universe of projects in New York City that have received an allocation of low-income housing tax credits, right? We are the allocating agency. We also work closely with New York State, the other allocating agency. And so we know who's received tax credits. We can do outreach to them before they reach Year 15, talk to them about what we can do to help them, talk to them about what they're going to face and the questions they should be prepared to answer. So that, I think, is a unique space where we have a known universe and we can do very proactive outreach. There's a lot of other types of preservation work we do. Not all of the properties that we serve within our preservation programs are regulated before they actually come into the city, right? So there are certainly properties out there that are rent stabilized, but they're not under a regulatory agreement with the city. There's no income restrictions, but they may be looking for assistance, right? So they are open to entering into a regulatory agreement with the city, and in exchange for maybe a property tax exemption or help doing renovations through a loan, So that's a little bit different type of outreach, right? Where we've done different things over time. We've gone through organizations, right, that have membership when maybe their members are interested or, grappling with a certain issue and could use assistance. We've also done outreach where we know owners are facing a moment in time, an issue. So maybe owners that have higher violations and, where the issue isn't so much willingness to address the issue, but access to capital. We've done targeted outreach to properties that have tax liens to try to figure out if there's a way that we can help them address those issues and stabilize the housing. We've done outreach also within the regulated housing stock to properties that have expiring benefits. So maybe a J51 benefit, tax exemption is expiring, or a Mitchell-Lama is coming to the end of their compliance period, and engaging with the property ownership about what they're facing within the property and if there's a way for us to help in order to ultimately stabilize the property itself, but also make sure it remain affordable for the residents.
It's interesting. I read an article where you had said something that I think is very poignant. It's just preventing subtraction is the same as facilitating addition, which is penny saved, penny earned, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I think that's what the issue is, which people don't understand. A lot of people don't understand. Even those who do housing, we don't do too much preservation work ourselves, which is preservation is there's like 30 programs out there for preserving affordable housing.
Yeah. And historically, the agency, for a long, long time now, the vast majority of the work that the Office of Development does is preservation work. Again, that's not what people necessarily see or hear, right? It's easier to do, an event where you have a brand new building, right? And it's flashy, it's pretty.
Yeah. You have a ribbon cutting, a groundbreaking,
there's
top out.
There are a lot of great, and because of the work that we do, the buildings that we help finance are beautiful buildings, right? And they are achieving a lot of our housing goals. But the quieter part of our work, I think, is the work that, and very impactful part of our work is also the work that we do to stabilize the existing housing stock and make sure that that remains affordable for residents.
And there's two types of this preservation that I've seen. You have a financial and a physical aspect, right? One where you're giving some money to the landlord to preserve the affordability, and the other one to actually do the physical work. Can you touch upon just the differences between those two? Because I don't think that nuance is understood by a lot of people.
Yeah. So in preservation, we have program term sheets, right, that lay out the type of financial assistance we can provide and the restrictions that we will impose on a property that participates in a program and accesses that financial assistance. There are a couple big tools that we have. There are property tax exemptions. Certainly J51 has been one of the major exemptions historically. In the last couple of years, we've had kind of cycles of authorization or not authorization, which have made it less predictable. So that's certainly been a core part of our preservation strategy. We also have discretionary benefits, tax exemptions. We also can provide subsidy to property owners to do renovations. We also have access to rental assistance, right? So the HPD actually has Section 8 that we can allocate, and it's specifically used or used pretty heavily to support our development work as well as properties within our asset management portfolio. So we have these different tools. And, we see oftentimes properties, they have a number of things that they're trying to do. It's oftentimes not exclusively trying to improve housing conditions or exclusively improving the financial conditions within the property. Oftentimes it's both of these things. And so we will layer assistance in order to address the specific needs within the portfolio. So for instance, a property today may be spending a lot on maintenance. And so their expenses are higher than they would like. And because their expenses are higher, they're having cash flow issues, right? So it's a circular issue oftentimes where, costs are higher because conditions, maybe it's been 20 years since you've done a major investment, right? And the windows are reaching the end of their useful life. You have to replace them in. Oh, that's a major investment in a property, right? Or the roof, it's been 16 years. You're starting to get to the point where the integrity of the roof is not great. You might have some leaks. You're thinking about, do I cap it or do I replace the roof? So those are important decisions, right? Because it's about your ongoing maintenance, whether you do the investment, do you have the capital to do the investment in a moment in time? And that then can have this ripple effect. I think our intervention is important and can be critical for many properties because we can provide a low interest loan, right? That low interest loan, certainly today, maybe, if you're looking at a product out there that's providing a longer term, stable financing, 7%, maybe 7.5%, 8%. We've seen it 8% in the last year. And our loans are essentially 0% paid. And so that is a huge differential for a property owner in terms of being able to make that investment and to be able to afford the ongoing expenses of the property so that they can continue to do investment over time.
And I think that's a very important point, and one that's actually more important, I think, after the 2019 rent laws, which we've at least seen, and maybe you've seen as well, which is an uptick of these properties that are struggling because, and we have other properties that we're working with landlords in connection with Article 11s to give them financial assistance because the rent laws essentially cap their ability to increase rents. Meanwhile, operating expenses, as you said, are increasing. They're running into trouble. And so what program I fit into? What can I do to preserve the building because they're in financial trouble? Have you seen a huge uptick that's directly related to that?
This has been I don't know how to describe the last couple of years. Nobody, I think, had the crystal ball that could have anticipated the number of
unprecedented times.
Yeah.
Unprecedented. I mean, right, the pandemic itself created some really difficult circumstances for property owners. And I think a lot of people may recall early in the pandemic the complete construction stoppage. Even for owners of existing buildings, it wasn't just construction stoppage. It was a question of if you needed to do work and work with residents, were they comfortable with you being in their apartment in order to do that work? And so I think there were those challenges. A lot of households were impacted, lost jobs, right? And so, that has certainly impacted the ability of residents to pay their rent. That then impacts the ability of owners in terms of being able to keep up with their property's expenses. So there's been, even the pandemic itself created some really difficult circumstances for property owners. If that had been it, right, I think, we would be talking about, stabilizing at this point in time. But over the last couple of years, right, in order to manage inflation, interest rates have gone up dramatically. Operating costs have gone up dramatically within properties. And so we've had a confluence of things.
Non-payment.
I mean, tenants continuing to struggle. And so we've had a confluence of issues that have made it, I think, really challenging for existing building owners to balance everything. And so we have, we've had preservation programs for a very long period of time. And unfortunately, I don't know of any record of demand that we've tracked. We have since early 2022, we started to track demand for our preservation programs, because during the pandemic, that team was particularly hard hit from a staffing perspective. And we started to have a backlog of properties. And so we knew we needed to keep track in a different way. And we've had really significant demand. And it makes sense given all of the issues that property owners are facing. And so we've made a lot of progress on the staffing front. We're continuing to do so, but we have a lot of demand for those preservation programs.
And especially with no tax exemption, at least no 421 tax exemption existing, there's now more need for development in New York and trying to spur development, some of which the governor is doing, some of which the HPD is doing. And one of the programs that I want to talk about is the new one that came out, the Mixed Income Market Initiative program, which is obviously new, right? Is it out? The term sheet's out, but did it start? Did it begin?
So, that's an interesting question. So maybe just to tie the preservation piece for the new construction piece together for a moment, one thing HPD has had access to for a long time is, as of right, tax exemption programs that allow us to work at scale to address needs, right? There are millions of property owners in New York City. Our work with our loan programs is really important, but it's pretty labor intensive. One of the things that we've had historically are programs like 421A, J51 for existing property owners. which allow us like a very clear structure where property owners have transparency about what the program is, and we can effectively and efficiently execute. So on the preservation side, the state legislature passed J51 last year, very exciting. And now we're working with council to reauthorize that program in the city. And so we're really excited about that in terms of being able to help property owners address the number of issues they're struggling with today. With new construction, the administration pretty early on said, we need to build more housing, right? And so we have this moonshot goal of 500,000 units over the next decade. And that's market rate housing as well as affordable housing. My piece within it is clearly heavily weighted toward affordable housing. 421A has been a critical program historically for the city in being able to create new housing. So since 2016, for instance, about 80% of the new housing created in New York City was a result of 421A. That is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, any community in New York City, go walk around, you look at parts of the Bronx, parts of Manhattan, Queens, go anywhere, and you will find buildings in New York that were developed because of that program. And it has provided a huge amount of affordable housing as a result. And not just because of 421A, but oftentimes the pairing of 421A with inclusionary housing. So last fiscal year, we had one of the highest years ever in terms of financing new affordable housing, over 12,000 units. And of that, about 50% of it came through our subsidy programs, where we're financing 100% affordable housing. We're using our capital budget to do so, property tax exemptions and low-income housing tax credits. And the other half of it came through as-of-right programs like 421A, often paired with inclusionary housing. And so from an affordable housing perspective, that impact is significant. You look back almost a decade ago now, you'll find the agency producing about maybe a little bit more than half of that level of new construction, with the as-of-right programs providing a certainly component of it, but not half of that production. So it's an essential part of the toolbox. It allows us to finance hundreds of transactions a year across many neighborhoods and help us not just address housing supply issues and affordable housing issues, but also is an important tool because it helps us provide housing access in stronger markets.
Areas where you normally couldn't do 100% affordable.
Or it's really expensive to. I mean, we could do so, but the cost of doing so would be much more significant.
Exactly, yeah.
And so, from we had a hearing with City Council back in the fall where we talk a lot about our goals around fair housing. City Council ended up passing legislation this fall, fair housing legislation, that I would say complements the Where We Live fair housing plan that the city has had, where we now have housing targets in every community of New York City. And so as-of-right programs like 421A or an alternative property tax exemption for affordable housing are essential because really is that multi-pronged approach for us. Helps us with housing supply, affordable housing, and allows us to work within communities that are pricier and where it's harder to build otherwise.
Why do you think that the legislature doesn't understand what you and so many others at HPD and other agencies understand, which is it's not going to work? Is it that they think it's a giveaway to developers, so they don't want to give that to developers, and so they're willing to sacrifice essentially the rest of New Yorkers? What is it that they don't understand? Are they just being obstinate, or do they really not get it?
Yeah, I can't speak for the state legislature, and I think there's a lot of different people there with different opinions. I can speak to some of the challenges that I've heard about, right? There's certainly, I think, an impression that it's a property tax incentive and there is market rate housing in those projects. And so I think concern and that, that we're over subsidizing these projects, that we're giving too much public benefit in order to make these projects viable. And that, and especially in a moment in time like we have in New York now, where, we face budget challenges, right? We had over, I think I've read recently, 160,000 asylum seekers arrive in New York in the last, year and a half or so now. And that means that we're spending a lot of resources. And even before that, we had a lot of people in shelter because of
it's a different housing issue, right?
Different types of housing issues, but certainly same challenge that we have a lot of people in shelter where we are trying to make sure that we provide paths for them to get to permanent housing. But in the meantime, the city's spending a lot of money on shelter. And so we need to be mindful, it's true, of how we are using public resources. So I think there's certainly some questions, and we should ask those questions, right? Is this an effective use of public resources? And then I think there are also concerns or questions around the level of affordability that we get in projects and whether that is ultimately what makes sense. And so, I think there's a lot of other questions out there too, but those are two big ones that we've heard. I can say that this is an essential program for us. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, it really has had historically in recent years a big impact on the ability of the city to create new affordable housing. And so I think that speaks for itself. Yeah. I think we should all be asking the questions about, depth of exemption, the levels of affordability that make sense. But hopefully, given the issues that I think many people acknowledge around the challenges with not having enough housing and not enough affordable housing in New York, that we can find a path.
Yeah. And I think the path has been the workaround or replacement, whatever you want to call it, for Gowanus that Governor Hochul implemented. And then obviously Mimi, which it's in the spirit of 421A, but not precisely, if you want to just touch upon it a little bit.
So this gets to 421A as a critical tool. We're also have been trying to think about at the local level what we can do to expand or accelerate the amount of new affordable housing that we're financing each year. And so this, Mimi is certainly, or the Mixed Income Market Initiative, is not a replacement in any way for 421A. And it's definitely not a replacement for the work that we do today to finance 100% affordable projects. It's really an attempt to say, could we do more if we did it a little bit differently? And so rather than issuing a term sheet like we do in many of our programs, this one's a little bit different. We're really trying to experiment. So we issued a request for expressions of interest. The last week of December, we issued the RFEI, and we are looking for proposals for development of sites. And it's a competitive process. So we're going to be evaluating those project proposals to see if they can show us another way to use public resources efficiently to build more affordable housing in New York City. And one of the goals that we have is to be able to do this, as I mentioned before, across many communities, right? So we are particularly interested in whether this is a way to provide housing options in limited affordability areas. These are parts of the city where there is less access to affordable rental housing. So that's one of the things we're really interested in. And we're interested to understand whether allowing up to 30% or 30% of the units to be unrestricted will allow us to cross-subsidize at all and more efficiently use our resources to build housing. So this is one experiment. And, we have a number of these experiments that we're trying right now.
No, it's exciting that HPD is trying these things and doing this kind of work when there's a lot of suffering going on in terms of housing shortage. So it's a breath of fresh air to see that you guys are trying to make something of this. And I think it's great. I also looked at the 70-30 requirement. I'm not certain how those numbers are going to work. There's also obviously some level of people who don't want to necessarily move into a building that's 70% affordable. That's just an unfortunate part of life. There's NIMBYism and there's YIMBYism, and there's people who don't want to live in buildings that have affordable tenants, condo buildings or luxury buildings. So it's another social question. Maybe financially it works, but I don't know socially if it's actually going to work to make the financials work.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think we have a lot of evidence in New York that the demand for housing is so tremendous, right? That it's rare for us to hear that type of issue.
Yeah, that'll be just sitting down.
Right? And the number of people that apply to any lottery, whether it's in a 421A building, which is mixed affordable and market, or 100% affordable property, is tremendous, right? So we know the demand is there. So, it'll be interesting to see if there's a different response here. But my sense, based on what we've seen, in our couple decades worth of work, is that the need is so significant that I don't think that dynamic will really be there. I think one of the questions we're really trying to assess is, can we do this from a financing perspective more efficiently than if we fully subsidized 100% affordable? We're really trying to figure out some paths to build more that don't rely on low-income housing tax credits.
They're limited, so you
can't
subsidize everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have incredible tools in New York. Low-income housing tax credits has been an amazing program. And we have used and stretched that resource as far as we can. And we're excited to hear that, there's been some momentum at the federal level to look at reforms of that program so that we could do more. In the meantime, we can't afford to sit around and wait, right? And so we're really trying to figure out what we can do with the resources within the city's control, right? So we need the state partnership. We need the federal partnership. We can't, given the issues that we face out there and the number of families struggling to find housing, we are doing what we can now to experiment with some new ideas.
Yeah. I mean, it's so heartening to hear HPD's creativity and excitement to solving this problem, because us on the developer end, we're working on that end as well to try and provide this kind of housing. And we always work in tandem. So it's good to know that both sides are really pushing forward,
Yeah. I mean, we all need to be, there's a lot of partnership out there where we all need to be working.
It's a real full court press.
Yeah, not only working together, but thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that we're doing right now, kind of in the spirit of how do we increase housing supply, is we had a basement apartment conversion pilot program a few years ago. Mm-hmm. We saw a lot of challenges with converting basements. And, today we're potentially under some flood kind of watch risks. This is always on my mind. But, I think basements really pinpoint the challenges that we face, right? You have homeowners that want to stabilize their family, their own resources.
Make a little extra income. Create another unit and make some income.
A little more income. In the meantime, we have housing supply issues in New York City. And so people lease units, right, illegally in order to support their family. And people lease those units, not always knowing if they're legal or not. I would assume normally not really knowing, and face safety issues. So, we have, over the last few years, we've had a couple pilot programs where we're trying to understand the particular challenges around legalizing unsafe basement apartments. So that's one thing that we have looked at. And the newest version of that we're exploring now is this plus one AGU program, where we got some funding from the state. We paired it with some city resources and basically providing an opportunity or financial assistance to homeowners that live in a one-family home today and want to add an accessory dwelling unit. So we're hoping to also learn from that about the particular challenges that homeowners may face, and being able to do that and finance those improvements so that they can stabilize their family situation, a little more income, help their kids go through school,
and
provide a home for provide a little more housing.
It's a win-win.
Yeah, and one of the things that you had said about, or that I'd read about the pilot program, is the difficulties in financing these things, which is it's nearly impossible for someone to undertake it, because in that pilot program, I think it started out with 100, and it was one had maybe done construction work because it was nearly impossible.
So challenging. It really is. There are supposedly, we don't have exact numbers on this, but we've heard from some of our partner organizations out there that do this work and, are in communities talking with homeowners and others. There could be 100,000 plus people living in illegal apartments. And, what we found in the pilot program is that, the cost of just modifying a basement or cellar space in order to provide sufficient ventilation, egress, fire safety, the other key safety issues is significant. Certainly a few $100,000 potentially. That's a lot for most that's a lot for most people, right?
Yeah.
When you add on not just the city code requirements, but then you also add state building code and multiple dwelling law requirements. For instance, if you're converting from a 2 to a 3 family, the cost doubles. And so we face a housing crisis where there's not enough housing. People live in unsafe conditions. And then owners who want to do the right thing face real cost barriers, right? So how do we look at changing the codes in order to make sure we have safe spaces for people to live, but can do that at a price point where people could reasonably say, yeah, that's something I could do.
Really posing and trying to answer the big questions here.
So complicated. So complicated.
This is one of 1,000 questions that you have to answer. We're at time, but if you have time for one more question, I don't know. If you're not, then it's okay.
Yeah, just going back to, for a second, the two challenges or the two questions we often hear about 421A, right? Is it a good use of public resources, and does it provide the right level of affordability? We certainly on our end believe that the public investment is worthwhile. That's why the program has existed. And, we certainly, I think we can all talk about levels of affordability and what makes sense. And 130% AMI in New York City, given what has happened with AMI in recent years, is not really affordable to the average rental household.
And that's really what the crux of it is. That's really what the issue is.
So I think there is a lot of room for discussion around a program that can help really provide not just housing opportunity, but housing opportunity to the folks that really need access to it. But, from, what we know about, the property tax exemption and the, ultimately the affordability that the city is getting and the state is getting from that program, the tax exemption does actually make sense given the level of affordability that we're getting.
Totally.
So
is there any hope, do you think, and this is just obviously conjectures, that the governor will expand the program from Gowanus to other neighborhoods to the extent that this drought of no 421A continues?
I can't speak for the governor's office.
Great answer, by the way. Great.
For the state and what be interested in doing.
Would you be interested in seeing that expand, or would HPD want to see that expanded, or do you think it's better? I mean, I guess the program itself, is better. It actually gives more benefits. It's less complicated.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think we all are concerned about the housing issues. And so we are trying to be creative and solve the issues that we see today. But ultimately, we need a knowable program, right, that can help us long term address the housing needs in New York City. And so, the fact that the governor's office and the state has recognized some unique challenges in Gowanus and stepped forward to try to address that's admirable. But the issues that we face in New York City are real. And in order for us to solve them, in order for development teams to say, yes, I'll acquire that site, or I'm ready to move forward on financing it, we need a knowable program. And we need something that's citywide that helps provide housing access everywhere.
Definitely.
Amen. We're all for that.
Yes.
And we so appreciate having you. But just in case you forgot to say something or want to give any developers, either affordable housing or mixed income developers, an opportunity to contact you or someone at HPD, please you can plug that or mention it. I want to give you that opportunity.
Yeah, I would just say, we can't do this alone. Like I said, we need partnership at the state level, at the federal level. And we absolutely, everything we do is in partnership with development teams that are out there buying sites, trying to figure out how to get the financing together. Right now we're trying to be creative about how we use city resources. And I think we welcome ideas. So, if anybody wants to reach out to us to talk about possible opportunities, new ideas about how we could do more, I think we are very interested in that conversation.
And who should they reach out to? Is there a general
They can
HPD?
always reach out to me, but there's also contact information on each of the program areas. There's contact information. So in new construction, on the website, you can see their email addresses to reach out to there, where we have staff that will get back to folks.
Yep. So if anybody listening out there, ideas are welcomed, and HPD's open for business, and we're working with you guys every day. And we absolutely love the people at HPD. We do. We cannot function without them. You guys do amazing work, and you don't receive enough credit for it. So I want to give you that credit, or a little bit of it, and give you some applause. Good job, Brenda.
Guys, I love that button.
And let's not forget that HPD is also shaping the New York City skyline.
The New York City skyline. Guys, I can't plug it in
Almost
every
forgot.
episode now. I know.
I was so excited that you forgot because I could say it.
I didn't forget. It's just really hard to plug in.
Kim, thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking to you, and I look forward to seeing the amazing things that come out of all the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
in. We really
Thanks for having
appreciate
us. Thank you for having me.
Well, everyone, that's our show. Thanks so much for listening.
And of course, don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave comments because we love to hear from our audience, right, Brenda?
Yeah, feel free to reach out at info@sideandshine.com or visit our website at sideandshine.com. We really look forward to hearing from you.
You could also reach out to David and Brenda at dshamshovich@sideandshine.com and bslakowski at sideandshine.com.
Those are lengthy last names. You can just find us on our website.
That's right.